right, everybody, welcome here to show 152. Matthew Mezinskis here from the Baltics, Latvia, World Hockey bronze medalist. Very excited this Monday here, and happy to have from Eastern U.S., we have Alec Harris from Halo Privacy. What's going on?
What's up, guys? Good to see you.
Good to see you. We also have from France, our friend Michel from Nodal. What's going on, buddy?
Hey guys, what's up?
And very happy to introduce our special guest today, Obi Nwosu. He is from Fedi and working very hard to bring the good Fedimint protocol to the people. I had the good fortune of meeting him in Bedford last month, and we figured it definitely would be good to get him on the show and talk Fedi and Fedimint. So Obi, thanks a lot for joining, and welcome.
Thank you very much from Benfica winning Lisbon.
Yes, should have said that. So it's great. Got a good European American contingency here, representation from the global South as well. Just quickly with you, Obi, your story. You started CoinFloor long ago, if I recall. How did you first get into that business?
So, I first got into Bitcoin in 2011. Friends told me about it because I was always complaining how the world was unfair, and that meant the world lost out because we didn't have the best people in the best roles. And so we're losing out on Einsteins and Teslas, wherever they may be. And I'm also a geek. I studied computer science and cognitive science, popular now because of AI. And I was a CTO of a number of very successful European multi-country startups through late 1990s to the late noughties. So when they saw Bitcoin, they pointed me in its direction, 2 or 3 people within a period of a few months. And I saw it, and it's this world's first meritocratic money. I thought it was really interesting. I was still running my previous startup. I bought a bit and focused on my startup. When that closed and finished off in 2013, my soon-to-be co-founder asked me to sort of form a Bitcoin exchange. And I looked, Bitcoin was still growing. The small amount I'd put in had been worth a significant amount more, and decided to set up CoinFloor, but to do things that now seem common sense, but then were pretty groundbreaking, be a well-run exchange, as if we're going to be custodying other people's money, do it in a transparent, honest way, not try to trade against your own customers, simple things like that. And that went on for 8 years. And I sold it at the end of 2021. At one point we were 70% market share in the UK. The currency pair for Bitcoin to GBP was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I did the whole hitting the gavel and all that sort of good stuff. We gave advice to various people from this, from MI5 to the police to Bank of England and so on. And we also had a subsidiary, which was one of the first regulated exchanges in mainland Europe as well. So lots of stuff. Physically delivered futures as well, first in the world to do that. Unbroken record of provable solvency audits for 8 years. So a few little caps to our name.
Yeah, kudos, man. Congrats to you for all of that. You're Nigerian by heritage, is that right?
I would say Anglo-Nigerian. I was conceived in Nigeria, born in the UK. So I always like to imagine my mother made it to Heathrow Airport, and I combat rode down the stairs into England because it was very soon after she arrived, and I go, okay, I'm here.
Well, the only reason I ask, specifically about that and your Bitcoin story is I remember back in those days as well, like the concept of remittance and Bitcoin disrupting remittance was always a big idea. You still have relatives in Nigeria. Was that for your inner circle? Was that part of it?
Even from before setting up CoinFloor in 2013, I could see that there was a huge potential for Bitcoin in the global South. Especially at that time, I was focused on Africa, and most sort of close to home was Nigeria. So I used to make copious notes when I was a CEO at CoinFloor, and my first page of my first notepad has this picture of Bitcoin, Nigerian Naira, and this sort of circular. How can I get Bitcoin to Nigerian Naira to Bitcoin? It seemed like a massive opportunity. But I didn't have the ability to crack that at the time, partly because we were a UK-focused exchange based in the city of London. Our investors were people from traditional finance, and most of our revenue was from asset managers and high net worths and professional traders in UK and Europe. So it was very hard to convince people that the second market should be like, West Africa or LATAM.
Mm-hmm.
The second market was going to be Europe, maybe the US, but not. But at that time, for most people in the West, it wasn't clear that it was going to be worth the while to be in the global south. I think that's now resolutely changing. Everybody's going into the direction of realizing this is where there's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, which is amazing. And definitely, I think we'll focus some time on that. But back to CoinFloor and the idea of just, the exchange versus when I was, and I'm sure many, everybody has to go through this process. When you're first buying Bitcoin, the way I was taught, it was like, okay, buy the Bitcoin, but you got to pull it off the exchange immediately. I did it. Many people did that, but a lot of people didn't do that. What did you see with your customers, and was this a battle for you? I know that you are a fan of self-custody. We can talk about how that relates to Fedimint, but just strictly with the exchange story, what was your experience?
Yeah, no, with the exchange, it was very interesting. So I always say there was different phases of Bitcoin. It's the Gandhi: ignore, laughed at, then fought, and then it wins. And for me, I came in at 2011. And from that point to 2013, around when we were starting, and just in the wake of Mt. Gox, it was basically ignored. But Mt. Gox brought it to people's attention, and it was just ridiculed. It's like, how ridiculous could this thing be? But what happened was it made people, and I always find the best educator for Bitcoin is nothing to do with Bitcoin. It's bad actors, or it's overly onerous regulation or global events. They mass educate on a level that we can't compete with. And that happened with Mt. Gox. After that, everybody didn't need to be explained why you should take your money off exchanges. When you had most users at that time after Mt. Gox would buy Bitcoin and instantly try to remove it. So it was just the norm. Now, as a reaction to that, exchanges like ourselves, and although I'm proud of it, I also see it had a weird, unexpected consequence. We tried to be much more trustworthy, much more transparent, much more organized and structured, which was a good thing. But the downside was that people then started to their natural distrust and a natural inclination to withdraw subsided over the following years, until it sort of did a 180 and people felt much more comfortable to the state we were at least a year ago, where people felt much more comfortable holding their money on exchanges than self-custody. So we saw this weird transition. And so it became increasingly, at the beginning, we didn't really need to think about it. People would just withdraw immediately. But later on, we had to put more and more effort into trying to get people to self-custody. Now, many exchanges didn't do that because it's sort of, it goes against your incentives. Wherever you custody is often where you trade. So you can play lip service to self-custody, but you really want them to custody on the exchange. But in our case, again, you also want to list as many coins as possible. We bucked the trend and stayed Bitcoin only, which still allowed us to be profitable. We could have made 100x more money if we didn't. And we also bucked the trend to really try to self-custody. Get people to self-custody. And what we found was, after several years, when people now had did this 180, they came to the view, especially as they became more and more mainstream as well, that they trusted exchanges more than they trusted themselves. And that became the sort of prevailing view. And people, again, especially if they came from certain generations where they'd grown up to be taught to trust institutions over yourself, and they would resonate with that viewpoint. So that was where we were at, and that was when that became increasingly apparent. that's why, again, I became increasingly concerned with the end state. Because again, I always like to think, forget where we are today and 10% ahead of where we are today. What does the world look like when everybody, if we've won, everybody is using it? And the end conclusion at sort of like in mid 2020s was we're going to have a world, if you extrapolate wherever it happens, 10 years, 50 years, 5 years, where you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of people self-custodying, and everybody else will be custodying on half a dozen exchanges. Because that's the other thing with exchanges. Liquidity begets liquidity. They always centralize. And it was Mt. Gox, it was Poloniex, there's different ranges, Bitfinex for a time, but you always have one that has an outsized percentage of the volume. And so you're going to have, forget about a country of 500 million people in it using a CBDC. You're going to have exchanges, 3 or 4 or 5, each one with 1 billion plus customers. And they'll have full insight with no oversight, which would be even worse than a nation state in terms of the level of visibility they would have if we allowed it to happen. So that was where we were by sort of the 20s, 1920 and 2020. That was my view.
You mentioned, having conversations with MI5 and police, and I'm sure you had to speak with regulators over the years. So is it your view that additional laws and regulations are needed for clarity, or is there and just speak to your experience, right? But is there enough already, and we just need to operate within the existing rubric?
I think that there is enough clarity already, but my general view is that, and the clarity that's most important is the clarity around self-custody or non-exchange custody. More clarity will be beneficial, but the main thrust of that regulation is especially if you're fully custodying yourself, then you have, in most reasonable jurisdictions, you have the right to determine who you interact with. You don't have to perform KYC on your counterparties and so on and so forth. And that's the regulation that I'm most concerned about. Now, if you are custodying on behalf of others, there are lots of areas of gray. That area can be made clearer in certain circumstances, but some of it is necessarily hard. You have forms of custody that haven't been possible before Bitcoin. So multiple people can have simultaneous ownership of the same asset at the same time. That wasn't possible before the existence of Bitcoin. So that's where you have some challenges, and different jurisdictions treat it differently. Some will take the view, okay, well, if you don't have the ability to transact independently, then you're exempt, and others will say the same scenario, you aren't. And so that's where there is complexity.
So how do you go from running a regulated exchange to Fedimint? Can you maybe start by explaining really quick what Fedimint is for our audience, and then what led you to that project?
Okay, well, first, Fedimint is a protocol. So I'm not running Fedimint. It's like the Lightning protocol or the Bitcoin protocol. Fedi is a company, which is a private organization that exists to accelerate adoption of Bitcoin Lightning and Fedimint. Because we see when you take those three things combined, they allow you to scale the Bitcoin ecosystem to billions of users. The analogy would be Fedimints would be cities, Lightning will be the motorways that connect the cities, and Bitcoin is the sort of foundation, the earth that they both sit upon. And that, as an analogy, scales to billions of users. One monolithic layer 2, which is an approach that's commonly used, that expected everybody to use, would be the equivalent of one city where everybody in the world lives, for example. Everybody using the Lightning Network and those cities would be the equivalent of everybody having their own private road connected to everybody else. Again, that doesn't scale. It's like the world would be all road. We see this model through the way our bodies work, through the way nature works, through the way cities work, through the way the internet works. We have IPv4. We cannot have every person, every mobile in a phone having its own personal static IP address. The IPv4 doesn't support that. but we still have billions of users because we have something called network address translation, where a few IP addresses are shared amongst an organization, a hosting provider, and so on. That allows IPv4 to scale to the world. We do the same. Federations, think of them as cities or companies or organizations or communities. And at scale, Lightning works really well as this interconnection process, but not for every. Again, you can have your own private road, and it's very expensive and costly to have your own private road and mansion. You can have at scale your own Lightning connection. So that was the understanding that led to the realization that Fedimint can help scale Bitcoin and the ecosystem to this global level of global adoption. The background to Fedi and Fedimint, the protocol, was actually a way of reducing the trust in this incredible protocol called Chaumian eCash, which is this private digital money protocol that was invented in 1983. This year it will be 40 years old. So it's very mature, very simple, very intuitive, but it required trust in one single institution, one bank, and also one money. And money at that time, before Bitcoin, could not be owned by multiple people. So if you couldn't own the money by multiple people, you might as well have one institution anyway. With the invention of Bitcoin and the idea of multi-sig, multiple people could take custody of or responsibility over the same money at the same point, even without having to be located physically in the same place. And that offered the opportunity then to federate, split up the bank as well. So if the money could be federated and the bank could be federated, which were the key prerequisites for Chaumian eCash, you could federate the Chaumian eCash mint, and that's where Fedimint came from. But what we realized is that it's Chaumian eCash, and a federated Chaumian eCash was the first app. This is actually a protocol for taking any process that you may not want one person to have single control over and federating it. So you federate access to Bitcoin, that's Bitcoin multisig. Federate access to the Lightning Network so that there's no one person who's controlling processing transactions of the Lightning Network. And of course, Chaumian eCash. But we're now seeing people looking at federating any number of other processes. So we did a hackathon where someone added support for federated Bitcoin-backed stablecoins and assets, federated community savings, federated password backup. Do I give all my passwords to LastPass so they can lose it, or do I have my communities with no single point of trust with people I know handle my passwords? So anything that you think maybe it benefits from no single point of trust, I can run it in a federated manner, which is why we see Fedimint is almost like this federated operating system. It can run any application that you think should not have any single point of trust. And you also have these primitives of eCash, Lightning, and Bitcoin always there and easily accessible by any of the applications you run on top of it. How did I transition to that from running CoinFloor? As I said, in 2020, I wrote a tweet which I said 2018 to 2023, Bitcoin was ignored. 2008 to 2013, Bitcoin was ignored. 2013 to 2018, Bitcoin was ridiculed, because I remember the first 5 years of running CoinFloor, we were literally laughed out of rooms in the city of London for this sort of joke, especially after Mt. Gox. It was basically ridiculed. And after the price peaked to around 2000 and it plummeted, most people, experts in the space, in traditional finance, thought that's it, it's gone, it's not coming back. But what people realize is that if Bitcoin doesn't die, that's how it wins. It just wins by not dying. And so it went down in value, it didn't die. And that's when people realize, okay, this thing doesn't die and it keeps growing. Now we have to take it seriously. And that, from I think around 2018, when I catalog it, onwards was when the attack started. Now, Bitcoin is an idea, and you can only you can't attack an idea with missiles and guns. You attack it with misinformation and extremely onerous regulation. And that's what you started seeing in different quarters. And that's when I realized that it was sort of the attack began there. It didn't look like an attack for people who weren't looking, but that's when it began. And based on some of the stated timelines for delivery of certain things, CBDCs and so on, they all seem to be coincident with about 2023. So that's when I put a pin tweet in 2020 that was saying that that Bitcoin will win in 2023. Why? Because the crescendo of the attack would be 2023, and so if we work together as a community, this will be the year. This will be the sort of Avengers Endgame point where it will be attacked most. It will potentially see significant volatility in its price, potentially downwards. But again, just like around 2018 when we saw things that fall and it didn't die, as long as it doesn't die, that's it. It's won, because it will. If the hardest attack has been attempted and it passes, then there's no more attacks that can come. And that's what we're going to see this year, including very onerous regulation from some of the biggest jurisdictions in the world, incredible levels of misinformation, and we will make it through that. Or we won't. You can't just sit back and it happens. But I have to believe that we will win that. And so, but this will be the year where the attack happens, and we have the pieces. We have the base infrastructure, Bitcoin. We are seeing with alternative currencies, people are seeing the cracks starting to form, and they're going to become more and more obvious in the models of where there's perverse incentives. I can go into what those perverse incentives are, but that's becoming clearer and clearer this year. We're also seeing that Lightning Network can work at scale if it's this interchange network, but it needs something else if you want to scale to billions of users, a layer 3 beyond that. And now we have that layer 3, and we have alternatives that people are working on as well. But we think Fedimint is a very viable layer 3 for much of the world. And so we now have the missing pieces. We have the funding, we have the recognition, we have the attention on the Bitcoin community. If you look at what's happening in crypto, everything of interest, whether it's even debates and arguments and so on, it's all between Bitcoin and Bitcoin. So it doesn't matter which side you choose, you're still choosing Bitcoin. Nothing really interesting is happening anywhere else. So that's because attention is moving. Whether it seems painful, it seems frustrating, but what you need to do is step back and where is the attention? Nothing interesting is happening anywhere else other than Bitcoin. Whether you agree once or the other, everybody should agree on that point.
Good, you mentioned alternatives. I wanted to ask you, because I think Alec mentions eCash a lot when he speaks about Cashew. How does Fedimint, for the money aspect at least, compare to Cashew? Is it something which could be interoperable, or is it a completely unrelated and independent thing?
Yeah, I think Kale's really good, cool guy, and he's working on Cashew. But I think Fedimint is something very different. I mean, eCash is one app. It's like saying that Microsoft Windows is Word or Excel, or saying that the iPhone is the phone app. It's much more than that. That's how we started. Fedimint was built as a solution to federate a Chaumian mint. But we realized that the ability to federate any application and have this first-class access to Bitcoin, Lightning, and eCash, that's these primitives that are available to you, is very powerful. It's a bit like you have an operating system and without having to worry that your operating system can run any application, so it's extensible, but it comes built in with support for file manager, i.e. storing information. The internet nowadays is now a standard part of any application, and the ability to execute other applications. So based on that, I can have app stores and so on, and each computer, although they can all run the same software, they don't. They pick and choose, and they run the application that makes sense to them. So in theory, with Fedi, and we just did an announcement at Bitcoin Miami, and one of my co-founders, Justin Moon, showed the extensibility. We call them Fedimint modules. They're the equivalent of web apps on the millions of sites on the internet, or mobile apps on your mobile, or desktop applications on your desktop computer. We call them Fedimint modules. And one example was Zcash. You could replace eCash with Zcash, which is pretty private. It's very private, but if you're like a cryptographically Puritan, it's not as private as eCash, but it has a benefit of allowing you to, as long as you trust zero knowledge proof cryptography, to verify no issuance above the amount of assets that you're supposed to have. So you can externally verify lack of debasement effectively. So you can have that trade-off, or you could, if you wanted to, replace Zcash or eCash with user accounts, and then you have no privacy at all, but you have full transparency. Which, for example, if your community is a company, you might think, well, the guardians for that community, because federations have guardians, trusted members of the community who actually run it, could be the finance department and the C-suite. In that case, they don't necessarily want full auditability in that case for the guardians. So you could replace that and put that in if that's what you wanted. If you wanted a different mechanism for transfers of value other than Lightning, you could add support for Liquid, or you could support both. It could run both of those Fedimint modules, and then you could have modules that do things I said: a federated password manager, a federated file system, a federated Nostr server. So you're running Nostr, but if it goes down, it doesn't. And anyone in that community that's using that federation has this sort of amortized cost shared across the communication. And it's also more reliable, because if one machine goes down, you don't find all the users in that federation lose access to the service that Nostr provides. So, and these are just some examples. There were, as I say, federated stability pools that allow you to have Bitcoin-backed capital assets. So I can represent USD, gold, S&P 500, Tesla stocks, but actually behind the scenes Bitcoin. That's a pretty useful thing to do, and to do it in a way where there's no single point of trust. Once you've realized that it can run any application, but without any single point of trust, then you're comparing an operating system to one application on one instance of one application. So that's why I'm saying that comparison. But in the eCash application, which is one of, already there's a half a dozen, and we hope there will be thousands of these, the way they're implemented, they're logically equivalent.
Can you talk a little about the mechanics? Like, how does a community form? And can you kind of just walk us through, like, what's the process? Like, how do you start?
So community is an input, not an output to us. So we always say that we combine the most fundamental human technology, community, with powerful, with empowering technologies. We say with freedom technologies like Bitcoin, like Lightning, like Fedimint, and all the applications and modules and services that are built on top of it and connected to it. And we combine those together. And so, the combination of the two is what levels up humanity. The way you should think about it is that right now we have represented in the Bitcoin space the concept that sometimes it makes sense that the institution of capitalist organizations, company competition leads to great outcomes. We see that in mining and many others, and that we know that works. And we can see from history that competition and commerce can drive innovation and progress. We also understand that self-reliance and learning to do things yourself and improve yourself and so on also is a good use case and a good way of working. And we see that in the world as well. We know that it's good to become skilled at something and knowledgeable at something and level yourself up. But there's also another third thing that is very common in society, but we don't really see that represented not until Fedimint, which is the idea that humans can form communities, and we can have the situation where, as a community, we are able to achieve things that no individual can do, but collaborative, where it's a win-win. It's not competition, it's cooperation. So we don't really have this system right now represented. How do we leverage the power, the superpower of cooperation to also level ourselves up? And this is one of the fundamental attributes of society. Cooperation is also really useful, and it's not the same as competition, and it's not the same as self-reliance. All three have different use cases. And so Fedimint is basically taking the power of cooperation of community that already exists in communities around the world in whatever form, and then just providing them tools so we can supercharge what you already do. So you sometimes see this in other parts of the crypto space, but what they tend to do there is they say, well, we believe we understand how governance should work, and this is how it should work, and then you should follow that. We don't do that. If you're a company, 50 different companies will manage themselves slightly differently, and we're not going to say this is how you should run your company. If it works for you, it works for you. 500 different communities around the world, whether they be small local communities or geographically distributed virtual online communities, will have different existing ways in which they make decisions and form, and they should already exist. But then they might want to work together to do certain things. If they want to, for example, save communally, right now they're probably just doing some sort of very manual process where they're giving one person the money and so on. We can instead replace that with Fedimint, where they can share collaboratively. Or they have certain costs which they may be incurring individually, like, for example, the cost to support a Lightning node. Those costs could be amortized across the community. Also, if they lose information or so on, it's good to have other people that they can collaborate with to help have each other's back. So, for example, one of the Fedimint modules is social backup and recovery. If I lose my keys, other members of the community we can shard and encrypt and share with other members of the community so that I can automatically recover my keys in the event of loss. Again, that's something where collaboration works really powerfully to help that process, which right now is a challenge for a lot of people. What do I do in my backup? What you'll tend to find is whether you consciously aware of it or not, your solution will almost always have some sort of collaborative element. I might collaborate with my wife, my son, or a lawyer, or a bank with a bank vault. But you're doing it as an ad hoc, expensive, inefficient way. But if you realize that it's going to require collaboration, you might as well actually make it in a programmatic, efficient, and simple way. If you just realize that collaboration is a very, very powerful technology, and we should utilize that.
It's a beautiful vision. So let's say the four of us, right? Just to bring it down to tangible, the four of us want to, propose a use case, right? How do we do it? How do we organize? Are we deciding on governance? What do we contribute? And say the example of the password manager, right? So it's great that recovery exists, but what is the mechanism to ensure that the recovery goes to the right place? Only I can recover my passwords.
Yeah. So let's say social recovery of private keys for your eCash. And in that situation, I'm assuming we're saying we're guardians. So again, a Fedimint Federation is this community custody platform run by trusted members of the community. Guardians, we'll be the four guardians in this case. And it has baked in Bitcoin Lightning, privacy, extensibility, and scalability. And it's run on behalf of the rest of the community. And let's say it's all the viewers of your show, and that could be, 50 million people, for example. But they won't be. Let's just say there's 1,000 of them have joined. So yeah, for example, I have the app open here. For example, this is Fedi. This is like a viewer. Fedi Alpha is like a viewer for a Fedimint Federation. And just like Slack or others, you can connect to this is the federation that I'm connected to. But you notice I can add more federations, and I can just, I don't know, without seeing what I'm doing. Am I doing a good job?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Yeah. I can scan another federation QR code and join, and I can join multiple federations. So I can pick and choose which federations I'm a member of. I know the people who are the guardians, but the guardians don't necessarily know who I am. And I can decide on Federation 1, I store a certain amount of money and certain data and certain aspects of my digital lives. And the same for each other federation. So I, as the user, can do that. And the person running the federation has no idea what other federations I'm a member of. So I segment my life in the way I want to do it. With each federation, I can allocate a certain amount of eCash, which is basically, think of it as Fedi BTC, but it's still BTC, just like Lightning BTC, and then main chain BTC. And then one of the options is settings, where I can click and I can choose to back up some information. Now, when I back up, I will say back up my key, and I can do the whole normal 12-word backup, which is a personal backup, or I can do social backup. And this entire process in social backup is a Fedimint module. It's an extension of functionality, just like an app on your mobile phone. So I click social backup here. It explains me a little bit, gives me a little bit of information, asks for camera access. And then it asks me to make you can see this background, but I will make a recording now. And it says, hold the record button and say Fedi. So I say Fedi. And then what happens is it asks me to confirm this video. Fedi. Now, then I say backup. Now, what happens here is a ton of stuff. And it's a ton of stuff which, if you go to one of these guides on best practice of how to back up your private keys in the absolute best practice way, it's just done it all. Normally, if you're trying to do it yourself manually, you'd take a while to do this, like several days and a lot of money. So what has happened here? First of all, first thing you have to do is locate who is going to hold your backup for you. Well, you've got the guardians already. We're running the servers. You're having conversations, recording a podcast, but your machines are running, like your Bitcoin node is running. So it's actually the machines that are the guardians. You're just guarding the machines. You don't have to interact with that process at all, because they're running these Fedimint modules, and this is one of them. So what's happened just there on my phone, I take my private keys, I encrypt them first. Then I split it up, because there's 4 guardians, into 4 cryptographic chunks. Yeah, so that it only requires any 3 of those to recompile. It's called Chaumian's secret sharing scheme, but it splits it up. Then, before it sends them to the guardians to store, and they're waiting to store it automatically, the guardian servers or Fedimint servers, it needs a way for you to be able to identify the person. But we don't want to provide any information to the guardians. So what we do is we take that video and we hash the video. And we use the hash of that video to tag each one of those shards. And then we send the hashtagged, encrypted, sharded chunks to the users. Now, that's the best practice. Most people don't do any of that. And they don't share it with multiple people. They share it with one person. That all happened in a few seconds. So you're left with the video of yourself saying Fedi, just that, and a private key to encrypt. Then we combine those 2 together. Again, this is all the Fedimint module doing this. Combine it together into a file on your phone. And now that file on my phone, I should save. I just need to save that anywhere. I'm just going to save it to send it to myself on WhatsApp. And then I sent it to myself on WhatsApp and I click good, done. And then it says, do you want to save it again? I can save it again, and I can choose somewhere else. Save as many times as I want. As long as you don't save it, you can give it to a friend. As long as they're not one of the 4 guardians. Anyone else of the other 8 billion people on the planet will be fine. Because to recover, that doesn't actually contain it's not like an encryption of your actual private keys. It's an encryption of the key to find the private keys and recover it. So if to recover, someone will have to go back to the Federation, and there's a similar process to recover where you upload the file to a new machine phone. It will then generate a QR code and say, get 3 of the 4 of you guys to scan this QR code. And if you can get 3 of the 4 to scan the QR code from this phone, then they will send you back the shards. But in order to do that, I have to walk up to you, especially if you're in an AI world. I would recommend walking up to them, or do it over a video call like this. But it's really hard to show someone a QR code over a video call and not show your face and not be really, really, really suspicious, So you have to show your face, and all the video at the point of scanning the QR code. At that point, again, automatically the Fedimint module will handle this. You will only then will your phone send just the video through with you saying Fedi. But what have you revealed there? You revealed your face and your voice saying the word Fedi, which is not identifiable in any way. And you're on a video call with the person. So you've only revealed what you've already revealed by being on that video call. You haven't actually, you're using the Fedi app. So it's implicit that you're using the Fedi app and your face is on the video call or you're in person. So you haven't actually revealed any additional information, and only at the time you need to recover. Now, if someone else, one of your friends tried that, they would have to look and sound and have the mannerisms of you. And if they're part of your community, if you're using the power of your community, it's not a stranger and an underpaid, overworked guy working for a curly-haired guy in the Bahamas, which we know doesn't end well, but it's actually someone who's part of your community. Even if they're part of the extended community, they've probably seen you around, and you need to get 3 or 4 of them to recognize you, not just a low-quality passport photo, but your face and your voice. Still not knowing your name or address or where you're about, just your face and your voice. I would go with that one any day over one person and a grainy passport photo who doesn't know me and doesn't care about me. So but that whole thing, that whole interaction is one Fedimint module. So that's why comparing, and eCash, this is why the idea started with this, and it was invented by one of my co-founders, Eric, and it was a solution to how to federate the Chaumian mint. But the solution to do that is way more powerful than that. Of course, as standard, we always think you should have best-in-class privacy. That's eCash. But you can swap it out for less. But we start with the best. My father used to say, vel primus, vel cum primus. Either the best or among the best. So we start with the best, but you can then swap it out for Zcash, which is sort of 90% there. Or you can just go for user counts if you want. And Bitcoin, I really don't think there's any point to have any second best when it comes to, there is no second best on that, but you can. But if you're worried about scalability and so on, Bitcoin, Fedimint and Lightning give you all the scalability you need. So Bitcoin and then Lightning Network, which is highly reliable. It's this interchange networking protocol for value, which is older than most other cryptocurrencies. And it's shown to be incredibly reliable and well supported and ever better supported. So we can add more. And if something else comes out that's better, we can just add support for it. But in a way where there's no single point of trust. So there's no net benefit, net loss for us to add support for any new protocol that comes about. And that's what people need to understand. It's not one thing. This is a platform for the base of this, in combination with Bitcoin as a foundation and Lightning for interconnecting, or any other alternative interconnection platform that can support billions of users in billions of use cases.
That was super helpful. Yeah, thanks, man.
The only other thing I would say on that was when you positioned it, how could we present that? That could imply another use case, which is I'm a developer or an engineer and I've got this incredible idea. And I want to be able to roll it out to these communities. How do I do that? And in that case, you just develop it, build it. You can host something simply with as a Lightning-enabled website, a WebLN-enabled website, and it can integrate seamlessly within. So, for example, as again, one of the modules that we have access to is a Lightning module, and that allows us to access the whole of the Lightning network. So, for example, this is running on a testnet, but we can allow you to get sats. But this web browser is running within the app. Why is that powerful? Because I can, for example, send myself sats, and it recognizes, instead of generating a QR code, which I then have to copy and paste and scan into a separate app, because the app that supports the wallet is also the app that supports the browser, I can recognize that and then just replace that and just say, hey, this person wants to send you 10,000 sats, and I can just click accept. And you can see here, it's just in this case, it's Signet coins. It mines the coins in live, but it's just sent me 10,000 sats. And I didn't need to, and then I close this browser because I'm still in the browser, and I look and my balance has gone up by 10,000 sats. And you can, with the main chain versions that we're playing around internally, I can go to a site like Stacker News, click a button to log in over Lightning, and it says, Stacker News would like you to log in. Do you want to log in? You click yes, and it just sends as effectively a zero value Lightning transaction. And I have one-click login without revealing my ID. And then I can deposit money to upvote a story And if I've sent too much money, I can click to refund and receive it, never having to scan a QR code. Again, because that's a different module. The Lightning module allows that to seamlessly happen, plus the eCash module. And so I can create all of these sites and enable them and make the experience as seamless as an app experience. Later on, I think I don't want my hosting costs, so I can package my whole site up and make it deployable on federations. So the federations run the sites. And federations can choose to run it for their own communities. And if they run the sites on their own communities, they can allow it to have access to more, instead of just high level and Lightning payments in and out. If I've got additional Fedimint modules, for example, community savings and so on, I can create an app which runs on a federation, which accesses those additional lower level features. So you can now build, without having the hosting costs as a developer, I can build apps just like I can build on top of on Windows or a Mac or an iPhone. I can build on top of federations without having to host, but still receiving a stream of revenue whenever they use my app.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, so many different directions we can go. In the interest of time, just want to ask, one thing I'm hearing now, which I didn't quite make the connection before, is all the additional modules and federated apps that you can do besides the eCash. But still, that was my impression that was kind of the core of Fedimint, was it was to scale payments and to scale finance, to scale banking in a community federated manner, which is great. It's like fiduciary media and free banking, which I'm a huge fan of. But it's in a free way, and with eCash that's completely federated and can be anonymous, much more anonymous than Bitcoin itself. So I know this is hard to predict, but I guess my question is, do you see Fedimint as a basis for like a huge global ecosystem of federated apps, or versus just that sort of core banking function?
I think it's one and the same, because if we look, you have this highly centralized internet right now, where there's one or two very large companies getting larger all the time. And I think we have to be concerned about big tech more than big company, because they have incredible amounts of power with, even the most minimal level of oversight, they have none. So that's, in my mind, more worrying. But to replace that, we as a community are trying to form this sort of decentralized alternative where you have things like Nostr, IPFS for data storage, Bitcoin, of course, Lightning, etc. But for that to work and be a viable alternative, even in future, I can imagine decentralized, federated AI and so on and so forth. These apps will need a new funding model, because the funding model of the centralized world has been advertising. You're the product, and then they effectively sell it to advertising, and it's all free apparently, but you're paying in a different way. So what is the alternative? It has to be, for it to work, because advertising only works at scale, is it has to be, you have to pay for the usage. So if I want to make a query to AI, you're noticing they're charging for it, because it sort of obviates the need for advertising, because I can give you the answer to your question. So adverts stop making sense. So you're seeing advert revenue based on usage. You're seeing that on Nostr. You can get a free level of usage, but if you actually want a good quality of service, you have to start paying for Nostr relays, which is great, because you're seeing the first signs of people understanding that if I want more control and of my money and my data and the app and my digital lives, I'm going to have to just pay for as I go for the usage. Well, that means the increase of the decentralized world equals an increase of transactions and of Lightning transactions, of interchange, etc. But we want to make that scalable. You need to be able to send transactions at near zero cost. And at scale, again, you're going to see a lot of that being eCash transactions happening internal to federations. And now and again, you're going to have these balances going between federations over the motorway. But just like in most cities, most economic activities within cities, and then there's this transfer between cities. So they are one and the same. If we have a future which is more decentralized, then we must have a requisite increase in Bitcoin transactions, Lightning transactions, and inter-federation transactions, which are eCash transactions. And also the power. But once you do that, you realize that the power of that allows you to no longer have to know who you're transacting with. So you should, by default, offer people the highest level of privacy that they can expect without reducing functionality. And there's no functionality loss when you're just charging for the service, because then I can say, well, I'm delivering a service. It's near zero cost, especially within intra-federation. So I can just do pay as you use. I can stream money. And therefore, I don't need the various information that you would normally need in a world where it's based on advertising, etc., where the advertiser wants to be able to locate and contact the person afterwards that they've spent money with the service provider on.
So speaking of monetization, first congrats for your recent raise.
Thank you.
But what I'm curious to understand, like, how do you monetize the Fedi company itself?
Fedi company, it's quite simple. Fedi, the actual app, or the actual service, the software, Fedi Alpha, is a pay as you use service. So it's as if we facilitate a transaction using the Fedi Alpha, it charges a very, very small few basis points fee. Not in alpha, but when we go to full production, we will. And that covers the overheads of the company and allows us to reinvest in the open source ecosystem, reinvest in building not just on Fedimint, but also on Lightning and on Bitcoin, because we're it's an aligned revenue model, because it doesn't really matter to us how people are using it, as long as we will continue to earn no matter what. So we then can support anybody, anywhere that's delivering value to the communities they have. And then a really big part of us as well is that we, a big part of the raise is that we go around and we are looking to hire hundreds. In fact, we're targeting by the end of 2026 over 500 Fedi Masters, Fedi Knights, and Fedi Ambassadors. This is sort of this on-the-ground evangelism, education, and support service. Think of it like this decentralized genius bar for the world. And so normally an app is, here's a piece of software and you figure out yourself. But if you're getting, again, to 8 billion users, you have to think about models that have got right down to the least sophisticated users, and have been comfortable with very high technology. And a clear example of that is Apple. So, but we want to take that model, but be the Apple for everybody. So that's our approach. It also means that most developers tend to be developer heavy, business development light. As an organization, we're going to be business development heavy, developer still heavy actually, but business development heavy, so that as this platform, if you build on us, just like if you add yourself to the App Store on your iPhone, we effectively can help drive adoption of good products that actually solve problems for communities. We can drive adoption into those communities, and you gain a benefit. We become your business development arm, the outsourced business development arm for your company. But instead of charging 30%, it'll be we don't actually charge anything because our fees, or a tiny fraction of that, because our fees come from just more usage of our app equals more revenue for us.
It's a great view. I mean, I remember we met at Human Rights Foundation last year. Are you going there again this year?
Yes.
In June?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I mean, that, going back to, we talked about at the beginning, like with remittances and kind of a lot of the original views of Bitcoin for everyone. Something like this just truly seems like it really could change the game and really help it scale. Do you guys have, everybody likes to stay away from the word roadmap in this decentralized development space, but do you have a vision of, I mean, I know you said how you want to sort of build it, but do you have a vision of
we do.
Communities that you'd like to see in the next 5 years?
So we have 3 communities. The Fedi, as the company, exists because of also Freedom Forum, and where we met some incredible human rights defenders, activists, NGOs, working in some of the toughest parts of the world which are under the yoke of authoritarian regimes or dictatorships, which is more than half the planet. And we realized that they do have a superpower in those communities, their ability to collaborate and cooperate with each other, and they have to survive. So Fedi fits perfectly into those, and I've been fortunate enough to build really strong relationships with members of or activists and human rights defenders, etc. So we are already trialing in many of those sort of zones and challenging areas. And again, this represents billions of people. And the communities that they support and serve are numbered in the hundreds of thousands to millions. So we are working with those already. And that was always our commitment. That was our first market. The next is the global south. Again, so the first is people who have banking potentially, but can't trust the banking. If I send money from the wrong account to my account in Belarus, I get arrested or shot. So there's banks that are great there, but I just can't use them because it's dangerous for me to use them. Then the second group is people who don't have what we would consider reasonable services, or they're unbanked or underbanked. It's the global south. And again, the first inroads into that are Bitcoiners who really love Bitcoin and care about it, but they also love a certain community. And there's a few million of those on our waiting list who want to, in terms of the number of people that they represent, few hundred, but the number of people they represent is a few million. And you'll know some of the names like Bitcoin Lake, Bitcoin Akasi, and so on. Again, we're working with these. That's the second group. So we're going to work with those groups. Will take us a few years to work through, but we're starting already with them, and we will work with them through the background. Near the end of this year, we've just released Fedi Alpha, which is the first version of Fedi that people can see and play with, but it's Signet Bitcoin. Well, there's a federation that we've also set up, which is Signet Bitcoin, not real Bitcoin, but it still operates like Bitcoin. And you can see the power of it, and we're focused at developers and builders to build Fedimint modules, Fedi apps from around the world, ideally close to where the problems they are. So if it's in the West and they see problems in the West, whatever that may be, then they can build apps for that. If they're in the global south, they can build apps for that. They can build apps for anybody, anywhere, but we think it's as long as you make it really easy for people to build functionality, which we will be doing, we'll be making more announcements over the coming couple of months, to build, then people should be able to build anywhere in the world for the problems they see locally. And we expect to see use cases come from that. By the end of this year, or before the end of this year, we want to roll out a full production version, ideally with a marketplace or not a marketplace, but a universe of Fedimint modules and so on that support various things. If it's integrating with SAP, because for companies or Sage on one side, on another side, it's adding community banking or so on. We're building that over the coming months, and then we will roll out, once we have that requisite feedback and experience and this sort of list of apps. So we roll out to the full version of Fedi then. In parallel, we're hiring I'm giving you a lot of information here, but we're hiring our Fedi order. We're making very good progress there. And over the coming years, we're looking to hire, I said, hundreds of these, predominantly in the global south, or people living under the yoke of authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. Because in the West, there's already an abundance of really great podcasts and speakers. So we don't need to do effort to explain the concept or the existence of this. But areas where people are not thinking about Bitcoin, they're not thinking about Lightning, they're thinking about, I need to survive, or I need a way to help give money to this person. That's where we're hiring the people on the ground. The end result, end aim is for us, we set a target by the end of 2026 to have 1 billion people using Fedi. And that seems like a lot, but it's actually, when you break it down by communities and based on our average community size from our initial numbers, the first few hundred communities who have signed up, you're talking about the mid-teen thousands is the average community size we're seeing. So you're talking about 100,000 or so communities to get to that sort of number. And 100,000 communities with 500 or so nights between them works out to be, a few communities a year per night. And so when you roll out a community at a time, it's way more powerful than trying to roll out to 8 billion individuals over time.
Fascinating. Whose idea was the Fedi night, Fedi order?
I can't say, but my name is Obi, but I'm not gonna say whose idea it was. It was all a happy accident. The name Fedi. We raised our first round after coming back from Oslo. We started fundraising, and we received all of the offers for the first raise, 4.2 million, in 6.5 days. And we didn't actually have the name of the company at the time, but we'd already got the commitments. So we had some other names like Fedimint Labs and then luckily one of the human rights defenders actually, Leopoldo Lopez, mentioned that Fedimint is difficult for people in Latin America to pronounce, just the way the word works. And then so you observed, and the words tend to end in vowels, and wanted to keep it simple. So why don't we just go for Fedi? And we checked, and it seemed okay. There didn't seem to be these big conflicts and issues with it. And so we went. But then after a while, that was considered, it just really stuck, and it's a really, really nice, simple name. And then you notice that it has similarities with another word. And so that helped us inspire us for some of the names of the Fedi order, I would say.
Wow, that's amazing. That'll be really interesting stuff. Thanks a lot for sharing this. Listen, as we close it, where can our listeners and viewers learn a little bit more?
So to find out, best place to start is Fedi, fedi.xyz is the website. If you're a builder, you can go there and find out how to start building on Fedimint. And we will have links to Fedimint and so on, or building Fedi mods. Or if you want to try and play around with it, you can see and understand the mission and vision and team. That's the best. For me personally, you can see it here. I'm showing my age, but I'm one of the 3 letters on Twitter, so OBI on Twitter. Or you can also get me on Nostr as well.
Fantastic. Listen, Obi, thanks a lot. Really, really interesting stuff. All the best to you guys. And it was a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.